I thought I was done talking about Magic Realm and hadn't planned to do another video on it, but there seemed to be enough interest in the progress or lack thereof that I ended up making in the game that I thought I would give you my thoughts on it. They're not my final thoughts because I do think at some point I'll get this game out again in some context, and there's certainly not a review because I only played what really amounts to half a game. I played about about 14 turns, 14 days in the game. And I say about because once I stopped filming, I also stopped recording my my moves in the game because, and I know this is completely against the main rule. You got to write everything down, but it just didn't make sense for me to do that playing as I was by myself and so intermittently. I was just sitting down for a few turns at a time. It added yet another level of apparatus to the game that already has, I think, overdetermined apparatus, basically. So what do I think about it? And here it is. Unfortunately, I packed it up before I realized that I would be filming it again, so I can't show you even the board, but I mean, honestly, not that much changed. I mean, I basically wandered around and I made an attempt to find things. I think I got one treasure, although then I went back and looked at the rules and realized maybe I shouldn't have been able to pick that up. But in any case, I never got to magic. That really wasn't my plan, but I never got to turn over any of these tiles and experience the living in that magical world, which even just from looking at the tiles, I mean, I think you can see the appeal. If you're a fantasy gamer and you just flip through these modular tiles, I mean, it's a little dark here, but this is like a beautiful purple caves. I mean, who wouldn't want to travel around in that? And that is really it's the heart of the appeal of the game, I think, because it holds the promise of living in this fantasy world and experiencing a world as if it were real in the context of a board game as opposed to, say, a computer game. And I went back to something I had printed out, unfortunately rather poor quality, many years ago, which is from the designer, Richard Hamblin, in writing in the issue of the General magazine that was devoted to this game, or not devoted completely, but that featured this game, I suppose it's more accurate to say. And this is a great piece of writing because I think it captures what the promise of the game is, and it also, at least for me, having spent probably I also didn't record how much time I spent on the game. I'm going to say 30 hours maybe to read the rules, set it up, play some turns, maybe. I don't know, I can't totally stand by that, but that's my feeling about it. But I want to just mention a few points he makes here early on because they form the context of what I'm saying. And he's talking about how do you capture the magic of fantasy literature in a game, which is basically what is attempted here. And he talks about that you want to create variety, and he talks about the fact that you want to create opportunity, the fact that you can really do whatever you want. And then he says, this is a major headache because of the second problem, detail. Fantasy adventures capture interest because they are explained in enough detail to make the experiences seem real and to account for the hero's thoughts and actions. Books can do this because only one adventure is detailed. But in a game, he says, every possibility has to be detailed. And I think that this really gets to the attempt, and also, at least for me, how it failed as a gamer, because he then goes on to say the headache is becoming gigantic, and then you get into a fourth problem, which is that of surprise, and just really attempting to create a world which is an amazing, just incredible effort to put this all together, and really mind-boggling. What I ended up feeling, though, was that I was playing out more of mechanics than game. And I will say immediately that a large part of that is just due to the lack of familiarity with the rules. But that hurdle of getting to the familiarity with the rules is also it's just it's part of this problem. To create this type of world is the type of rules you need to do that. Well, let's talk about those rules just a bit, because there are, as you know, because I've mentioned it, and as you probably know just on your own if you're even watching this video, three sets of rules. There is the first edition rules, which is what, well, I'm showing you the copy here, but I have that's what I got in my box, and these are about, oh, I don't know how many pages of rules there are, 36-ish, with the tables included here. Then there's the second edition rules, which are almost double in length, and these run to 69 pages, and then there's this unofficial third edition, which is 240 pages of rules. Now, of course, page length in and of itself is meaningless. It's really what is the content there. And I think for somebody who is an experienced gamer, as I would characterize myself, probably the first edition, this is programmed instruction, first and second edition, whereby you're introduced very slowly to the game mechanics. So in the first edition, you're just basically walking around, and then you just learn the rules on literally sort of how to move around, maybe how to look for something. And then the second edition is going to throw in some battles for you. The second encounter is going to throw in some battles. I was thinking ahead to the second edition. It's also a programmed instruction, but it gives you a little bit more to do in each encounter. And I think for an experienced gamer, and what I ultimately found was that the second edition, which provided a little bit quicker introduction to what you were doing here, in terms of how many rules were integrated in a linear manner. I think the second edition was where I landed mostly, for the most part, because the first edition just felt a little too slow for me. I think I did one or two moves with the first encounter, but there's no way I was going to play an entire game that way. So I sort of moved on and integrated back and forth between the first and second edition. I found the third edition rules to be not necessary and unnecessarily lengthy. I think that in taking a look at this game, it is certainly admirable to try to clarify, perhaps, but if I were doing it, I would have gone in the opposite direction. I would have simplified it down, because I think ultimately I've been trying to get to the essence of what I wanted out of this game and versus what I got. And I think my conclusion is that what I wanted was really the feeling that, in looking back, I got from playing, say, something like Search for the Emperor's Treasure, which is a Tom Wham game, totally simplified, but that's the feeling that I want, of wandering around this little map and of getting some companions and encountering, magical artifacts and magical beings and having little quests to do. That game gave me that. Another game that gives me that in a different manner is Runebound 2nd Edition, one of my all-time favorite fantasy games. It is, by comparison to Magic Realm, certainly exceedingly light, and in the context of the gaming that I do, I would say that's a relatively light game for me. Certainly, Search for the Emperor's Treasure is a very light game, and in fact, I went back to look at the video that I made on Search for the Emperor's Treasure, just to remind myself, am I remembering this correctly? Because I hadn't played it since I did that video. And in that video, I talked about the game as being one that you could use to introduce kids to gaming, to fantasy adventure gaming, and even wargaming. And I felt a little bit bad about that, because I feel like that I didn't mean to denigrate that game by saying that, because I certainly value bringing kids into the hobby, but it's not a kids game. It's a game for adults, and that game to me captured what I want here. And what you want here is to be in this picture. You want to have this feeling, this experience. And of course, if you play RPGs, tabletop RPGs, that is certainly an experience you can get. But when you're down to the physical artifacts here of a board game, I think it becomes quite difficult. The other point I wanted to make about, and well, let me step back. Difficult in this case, what I mean is it's difficult to translate the game mechanics into that feeling. So what happened to me as I was going around is it was like I just felt like I was doing like move, move, hide, hide, move, move, search, search. I really wanted to find something, so I kept rolling on this table, and when it boils down to it, some of this stuff is really simple. I mean, the hide table, which is one that you roll on all the time, could not be easier. It's a D6, and if you roll 1 to 5, you're hidden, and if you roll a 6, you're not, period. I mean, literally, my 3.5-year-old kid understands this. There are so many things written about hiding, and if you look it up in the index, for example, just to give you an example here of how this is so challenging, hide activity. Look at these entries here. You've got 8.3.4c.3, 8.3.6c, 8.4.2b.2. I mean, it's too much for me at any rate. And again, that is based on a table that I will show you what the table actually looks like. And, you know, I'm not saying this to in any way say something negative about the efforts of the people who, or the person or the people who put this together, but it did not work for me. Here's the hide table. Here's the entirety of the hide table. You can see 1 to 5 hide, 6 fail, period. So I'm not sure what else I want to say about it. I guess, well, the rules begin by talking about the here, let me look here. It's the second edition here. The characters. And I think this is also where the game, in a strange way, I think the game might play better if there were more, if you played it more as a conflict game. If you had multiple people with playing the different characters, because the different characters do have many differing abilities and strengths and weaknesses, and they have character. The characters have character. Let me just find them here. Here we go. In an odd way, if you were populating this world with with as many of the characters as you possibly could, of the 16 that there are there, and encountering each other with your differing goals. So somebody's trying to find treasure, somebody's trying to kill things, whatever, and then you had the PvP conflict that you were enacting. That's another way in which I think it could really come to life. Now, I don't play games, I don't enjoy games with conflict. I don't really play competitive games unless I'm forced to by like one of my kids, but I don't like to do that. So that's not a way I would be playing this game, even if I was playing with other people. But I think that maybe the game could come alive more in that manner because then you would be fleshing out, the differences between the pilgrim and the druid and the magician that are very different characters, and really see that enacted. So that is a point that I can't speak to whether that would actually happen, but and in thinking about it as I played through it, that was one feeling that I had, that despite the fact that there's all these treasures and spells and discoveries and things that you really want to get your hands on, it may come alive more through that conflict. Speaking of conflict, I did do one combat probably wrong, and I knew I encountered a tremendous troll, and in fact the rules told me with the Amazon, don't fight a tremendous character, but this was the end. Well, it became the end of my game. I knew it was going to be the end of my game, but I wanted to do the conflict and or the combat. And again, another thing about the combat, it's diceless combat, and in a sense you are having, it's mathematical in a way, in that you have the values, and I would suspect if you knew the game well enough and you knew your own capabilities, you could pretty much see what the monster stats were and know what your chances were, because it's like you are you have a limited number of things that you can do. I mean, not limited in you don't have enough, but you have the range of things that you can do and the chits that you can activate, and you know what their values are, and you know what the values of the monsters are. So the fact that it's diceless, I think, also creates, it felt a little mechanical. Now, I will hasten to say once again, I did one combat. I'm sure I did some stuff wrong, especially with the alerting of the weapons, I realized after the fact. So you have to take my comments totally in this context. But to sum it up, I felt like I wanted, let's just look at some of these character cards, because I think this is going to give the best summary of my experience of this game. Is I wanted to experience this, but I actually experienced something like this. I wanted the feeling of this, but I got the feeling of that. And, you know, that in sum are my thoughts about this game. I am certainly not regretting the time that I spent. You know, I wanted to be this guy. Who doesn't want to be this guy? I wanted to be this guy, and I just felt a lot like that. So, yeah, I don't regret the time I spent with it, or the effort or the money that I put into it, but I just did not get out of it with my investment of 30 hours, and maybe I should have, you know, persist, and maybe more than 30 hours needs to go into something to get something out of it. But for me, for my the time that I have, and frankly the interest that I have, that 30 hours, at least for right now, was enough. I think at some point I will most likely take this game out again, make another effort. Maybe it'll be next summer, maybe, who knows. I don't know. I don't know. It's an incredible work of art, and it is beyond my comprehension that somebody could create this. It really speaks to just the highest levels of creativity. But as an experience, for me, I was left unsatisfied. Thanks for watching.